Hello, and welcome in to Bear With Us on the Bear Claw Media Podcast. I'm Chris Bolin, joined as always by Ben Schleiger, but this is also a very special episode of Bear With Us where we have a former Bear with us here. Coach V, Playmaker's Corner. They do a lot of good stuff over there, UNC alum. I'm going to pass it to you, Ben, because I forgot to breathe during all of that.
All good, Chris. Yeah, it's nice to have three Bears on the podcast today. Coach V, you guys do big time coverage of high school football and also now high school women's flag football, and that seems like that's taken off and is growing like fire here in Colorado really quick. Happy to have you on today. How you doing?
Hey, appreciate y'all having me on again. I'm doing great. Pretty good. And yeah, girls high school flag football. We're starting women's college flag football right now too. It's like our fourth season. It's going great. But yeah, you know how it is. We always talk about our high school players. That's kind of our roots too. So excited to talk about some of these great players here.
Well, let's just kind of off the top. I'm sure you're familiar with just about all of these Colorado kids coming into UNC. What are your thoughts kind of on this class as a whole?
Yeah, so I know we lost a lot of players, or it felt like we lost a lot of players to transfer or what have you here. I don't expect this class to exactly fill some of those holes or all of them, but I like the class here. I think we got a lot of linemen, which is never a bad thing. There are players here that I know are listed at O linemen who could definitely play defensive linemen, whether it's tackle and whatever, but that's not a bad thing to have either. Sometimes you just don't know where they fit best until you get them in there here. But yeah, a lot of linemen definitely going for size here, which is good. And I think a lot of underrated prospects and some players that are really good. And I feel like we're guys that just CSU and CU just straight up missed, in my opinion, as well. But altogether, another solid class here. It'll be interesting where they all kind of fit in down the line, though.
Yeah, that CSU CU kind of missing out thing is interesting because that feels like what Lamb's kind of preached is Colorado's just under recruited. Like I remember Ben and I went to a practice, I think it was last spring, and he mentioned that like a lot of the kids that he had got in like last year were kids they would have like gladly taken at BYU, but just weren't really getting a lot of like attention because of kind of where they grew up.
Mm-hmm.
But anybody really stand out? I know there's a couple bigger names, but anybody you want to touch on off the top?
Yeah, for sure here. So I know there are two. I want to start with these two names here that myself and then all the other guys on the podcast really think highly of and feel like are kind of like the crown jewels of this Colorado recruiting class here. One to start is Jordan Rochelle, wide receiver out of Fairview here. He is actually somebody we followed all 4 years. I think the first game we went to as a podcast was actually his first start on varsity all those years ago, and he's an excellent athlete, listed at wide receiver, but also played a lot of running back the last 2 or 3 years here. And he's just a football player, explosive, great speed. When you get the ball in his hands, he is special. You just pull up his highlight reel and it's very obvious from the get-go there. He was actually somebody offered by CU his freshman year, him and his freshman quarterback Beckham Kritza, who's now committed to Penn State at the moment here. He's a 4-star quarterback. He left Colorado, came back and then left again. But, he got offered a new regime, obviously came in there with Coach Prime and all of them. And then it just didn't sound like that offer was going to be held up after that, which, it's a freshman year verbal offer. So it is what it is, right? But the talent never left. He's always been a big contributor. He's somebody who we all kind of expect to get in there on special teams and just give us some juice, just give us something back there and be a great returner at the very least. And then as a receiver, a little light here, which, we've all kind of always knew. He's only 5'10". On top of that, I think right now, just looking at this thing, he's like listed at 165. That might be the only thing holding him back from maybe getting more playing time, right away, or at least immediate playing time. But at the end of the day, he's just an explosive football player. He could put on some weight and probably play running back and be great. I don't say this lightly. I'm going to be honest with y'all. I don't say this lightly, but just watching him play running back, there are some flashes of Christian McCaffrey there.
Ooh.
Someone who's shifty, a little bit of a receiving threat, not a little bit, a huge receiving threat, just really hard to guard in one-on-one, and so that's definitely somebody that we felt like we were lucky. Northern Colorado was lucky to go ahead and snag right there, and hopefully he could contribute to that receiving core. So there's that. And then the other guy that we really want to talk about is Marquise Jamison, the cornerback from Cherokee Trail, 6'1", 175. We do a top 5 seniors list for Colorado players, and he was our number 1 rated corner, and it wasn't even close. I mean, he was just our number 1 rated corner. A lot of speed, a lot of agility. He's a longer corner at 6'1" here, and just super sticky. Could play man, could play zone, great ball skills, and he is somebody that we were lucky. We really felt like we were lucky to go ahead and get. Kind of felt like maybe he was somebody who could play at a CSU, or any other FCS school in the Big Sky even as well. But, we were lucky to go ahead and land him. And honestly, that's somebody that we look at and we're like, hey, he could also be a special teams guy right away, but also don't be surprised if he gets out there and, is taking someone's cornerback spot either this year or in the next couple years. But we just think so highly about him. I think as far as ratings go, he might have been our highest rated corner out of Colorado in all the time. And I mean, we've been doing this for 4 years, but in all the time we've done this, the other guy that is rated higher than him is currently declaring for the NFL draft. He played for Iowa State and Miles Purchase. And we see a lot of similarities between those two. Miles Purchase is obviously, he weighs a lot more at 200 pounds. But, same kind of build here. And so we feel like that is where Marquise is right now. And so those two guys are kind of the crown jewels of this recruiting class, in our opinion. Like, those are guys that we would not be surprised if they get in there, make an impact, and start somewhere. So that's kind of where we're at as far as like crown jewels go. And I mean, those are skill players, right? I think there's a lot of great linemen in this class as well.
Yeah, that's music to our ears. I mean, corner was a trying time this season. We had some guys out there that needed to take over roles, and some of them weren't ready, and some of them that were ready just didn't have the endurance to get burned all season long. So that's just music to my ears hearing about Marquise. And then receiver, I don't think anything's set receiver wise. So I think the door's wide open, and that'd be awesome if he could sneak in there. Some of the things that we were talking about before the podcast kicked off is you said there's a lot of kids on here that are versatile. Some guys might be lined up as O-line or D-line on the signing class chart, but you said there was a lot of guys who might have the ability to go back and forth. Out of the O lineman, D lineman, who's kind of like your guys' favorite out of those guys, out of the big beefy boys?
Yeah, for sure. Is it okay to talk about some of the transfers as well? Can I mention that first?
Yeah.
Okay. Sweet. So I know there are 2 transfers right here. You have AJ Burden, played for Cherry Creek, went to Iowa State, is coming back home, so happy about that. And then you also have where is he? Tyrese Johnson, defensive lineman, could play defensive end as well, in my opinion. He played for Washington and then is coming back as well. Both seniors, I want to say last year in 2024, maybe 2023. You know how time gets. So, yeah, but both of those guys we liked a lot. AJ, he was somebody who was hurt a little bit more in high school, but the talent was always there. I mean, he was somebody who we felt like could maybe play a little bit better on the inside than the outside, but just a physical specimen over there of power, speed, agility. He's somebody who could push for, a top, I don't want to say starting spot, but like at least a rotational type of role on the offensive line. Pretty versatile in general. I mean, those Cherry Creek linemen are always great. And then you have Tyrese Johnson, who is a versatile defensive lineman, played interior. He was a top 5 guy for us in his class as well, but could also play outside too, and plays with a lot of power and pretty sneaky agility and speed on the inside. And so we feel like those two are going to be big time as far as just trenches, right? And just having a little bit of experience, seeing what top FBS rosters look like, I'm sure they learned quite a bit there, and so bringing that into UNC is always valuable, obviously. So those are the two big transfers, and then as far as like just all the other linemen. I mean, you got a lot of linemen from the 3A classification, which we've always said super underrated, right? And great football, by the way, too. Great environments. Y'all obviously know this here. But, you got players like Grant Gordon, who's from Meade, who went to state this last year. He could play both ways, offense, defense, 6'4", 280, been a monster, and he's big time. You have Andreas Guillory, who we've covered pretty much since I want to say since he was a freshman, if not a sophomore as well, almost a 4-year starter for Green Mountain, who has so many great linemen, has a history of great linemen. He's arguably been their best one in the 3 or 4 years he's been over there, and just brings a lot of physicality. Listed at 265, which I feel like is really light, because I don't think he was that when he played. He might have slimmed down a bit, not, which is fine, right? But he's somebody who I feel like could also play defensive tackle and could be pretty nice up there. I mean, just having all that length at 6'5" on the interior, that's always a good thing. And then you got other guys as well here, and that's not to take anything away from them, but guys like a Simeon and Zion Salvo, both of these brothers from American Samoa, they moved here last spring, I want to say, and then played for Pueblo Central. I got to watch them in their first game here in Colorado, against a pretty big team in Discovery Canyon. And I mean, they're just dominant, physical, athletic, played both ways, both of them. So those are other guys. I know Simeon listed at DT, and then Zion just listed at offensive lineman. They could play both ways. I think they could play both ways and be fine. I mean, just big dudes who are they're gonna make you pay in the trenches for sure. And so a lot of big time linemen here from that level. And then I mean, I also want to shout out as well Dane Gray. He's technically a defensive end, 6'4", 210, a little light, from Thompson Valley, but that's obviously the team that won state in 3A, and he was a big part of that. That could be a really interesting developmental guy. I know some of us really like him as a sleeper too. So you got a lot of 3A guys, right? And I feel like all these guys have something to prove because they didn't play on the 4A, 5A level. So maybe that gave some colleges or whatnot a little bit of a pause because it's not 4A, 5A, they're dominating. But I mean, these are all guys who have competed against each other too, So they're good players, and I think we got a couple of steals here, just a lot of mass coming in up front on both the offensive and defensive side here. But it's definitely a good thing to see these guys being brought in because you're just building that depth, right? And then you never know, one of these guys may go ahead and start here. It would be really surprising if one of them did not eventually start or have a pretty significant role on the offense or defense. There's just a lot of guys who have been super productive and whatnot. And I mean, it's hard to argue with productivity on that level too.
Yeah, a bit. This one's a bit more philosophical, but you kind of touched on it with a lot of these guys competed against each other last year, the last handful of years. How much do you buy into that? Like the local ties kind of, you're building, Lamb calls it building that regional cohesiveness, whether it be just a couple sophomores talking back to like a state title game they played in a couple years ago, all the way to like maybe you get 2 or 3 Cherry Creek kids, that only probably influences the younger kids to like want to look at UNC. So how much do you kind of buy into that as somebody who sees a lot of these guys across the state?
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely buy into that. I think for Northern Colorado, with where we're at as an FCS, we're not Power 4, Power 5, right? We're not, I guess, lower FBS and whatnot either. I think for our fan base, that's huge. Just get a lot of guys that people know. I mean, because, their parents, family, friends, they're going to come to games. And that's always a big thing, right? But on top of that, I mean, these guys know each other. They know how hard each other competes. And I think that's a good thing because, I mean, it's just common whenever we interview some of these players, we talk to them and they're like, man, there's this kid down there in Pueblo. He was tough to play got no love, but he might have been the toughest defensive lineman we faced all season. I know a couple of those Cherry Creek guys, a lot of Cherry Creek guys, whenever we interview them, always give a lot of praise to their opponents, and even some guys they just train with as well. May not have competed against because of classification, but they trained with them and they're like, man, this dude, 6'5", 300, athletic. I don't know how you could go wrong with it, right? But I think that's super important as well because that's how you find sleepers, in my opinion.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely interesting. You're saying a lot of 3A kids coming out of here. Coach specifically said he was not going to look at 3A, so kind of wondering if that was a little bit of his tactic to be like, oh no, don't look at these guys, it's fine. And then went ahead and went and looked back at him. Pueblo seems to be a favorite spot for him over the last two classes. Anything you can tell us on the two, excuse me if I get them wrong, the Salveo kids?
Yeah, Zion Zimeon here. I think it's Salval, but I'm also pretty sure I'm getting that wrong as well. Yeah, I mean, these two guys, they got a lot of talent, right? And I think they're underrated because they lived, I want to say, in American Samoa for quite a while and then moved here for their senior year. So, like, they have tape from American Samoa. It's super grainy and it's like on their Twitters and stuff. But I mean, the dominance has always been there. And then I think playing on the 3A level where you got guys that they're going to go up against, like they played against a Grant Gordon, who's a big old 6'4", 280, right? They played against, I'm pretty sure, an Andreas Guillory, who's 6'5", 265, longtime starters, right? And I thought they proved themselves pretty well. I think both of these guys could also be sleepers just because of how, I guess, a little unknown they are. I will say this, they have a brother who was obviously a lineman as well. He played at CU, then transferred to CSUP, and he's always kind of like been a starter, right, on the offensive line. And then he coached both of them once, his graduating, or once he graduated and went over to Pueblo Central. And so I know he has given them a lot of knowledge that they've both used as a guy who, I mean, has played a lot of college football. And so I think both of these guys could be guys who could get in there. Like when I'm talking about rotational guys and sleepers, I'm kind of thinking about both of these Salval brothers here in Zion and Zimeon because, I mean, at the end of the day, if you're playing defensive line, hey, get pressure, stop the run, right? It's pretty simple there. Offensive line, a little bit, more complicated and whatnot. But I mean, if you want to put in guys who could run block and all that stuff, they're going to do it. And they're just going to set a tone too. It is a very, very distinct tone that they're going to set when you play them. In every game we watch them against, I watched them against Discovery Canyon, like I said at the beginning of the year, and then one of our other guys, Gideon, watched them in their last playoff game against Meade, where they unfortunately got eliminated. And I mean, they were battling in the trenches. Every play is a battle for them in the trenches. They work super hard and they're aggressive. And I think that is a mentality that you want to bring to any locker room, just in general, whether you're starting or not, or just competing. That's a good tone to set. And I would say those guys are big tone setters coming in to UNC.
Yeah, we love to hear all that, especially with the size. I mean, coach has definitely emphasized size, speed, power. He wants to be the biggest, the fastest, big sky team and all that. We'll see if that happens. But, the kids that have come from Pueblo so far, whether they're on the field or off the field, seems like those are just good quality guys on both sides of it. Somebody that we're also interested in, Gavin Lockett. He's listed as quarterback. He tells
Yeah.
coach he wants to play quarterback. We also hear from other, recruiting class and other parents on the team saying, "Wow, he'd be a great safety too." Do you have any experience one way or another if you think he should stay at quarterback, or did you like what you saw at safety as well?
Yeah, I mean, Gavin, another kid that we've covered forever. I think even middle school is where we
Right.
started covering this kid here. But he's a great athlete. Great speed, great agility. I just think with where he's at athletically, it's hard not to consider, hey, can we move him, somewhere else where we could help us, right? I think at quarterback, and I don't know, this isn't crazy, right? I don't think I'm bringing up anything that's like controversial because I've said it a million times over the last 2 or 3 years, but I feel like this coaching staff in high school did not do him a lot of favors at quarterback. Like he was super run heavy. It almost felt like they were just running a wildcat offense over there with him playing quarterback. But he's someone who could throw. I mean, I've watched him in sevens for like 4 years, and I know he doesn't have a noodle arm, and he could throw with accuracy, with timing, and all of that great stuff. He's also just happens to be fast and quick too, and so maybe that was just what worked best schematically. But I did feel like that, they could have threw it a lot more over at Pueblo West, and he could have showed off a lot more here. And so for him to go in and be listed as a quarterback, that'll be interesting for sure. We'll see where he's at because you have a bunch of other guys who, I mean, just ran offenses where they threw the ball more, where they had to make more reads, right? And so I am interested in seeing what happens. I think he can develop into a good quarterback. I know UNC, just watching this last year and like listening to y'all as well, it felt like this last season they really wanted a quarterback who was like mobile, right? Someone who could run around a little bit, throwing great, right? But maybe just a little bit more speed and mobility. He is that guy when it comes to mobility, being a dual threat. And so maybe he fits into Lamb's system a little bit more than some of the other guys. At the end of the day, as a quarterback, you got to throw the ball. And I mean, we'll see what happens. I think this is somebody that you kind of just stash. You see where he works out at, and just let him compete and see what happens. But I mean, I love Gavin. He's a great competitor. He is a great athlete as well. I don't think he missed any time in like the 3 or 4 years he played, which is saying a lot for somebody who gets like at least 10 carries a game as a quarterback. And some of them are scrambles as well, but not many. So he's definitely putting his body on the line. So very durable too. So he will be interesting to see what happens there. I wouldn't be surprised if he gets moved at safety or somewhere else. He's just a good enough athlete that you could put wherever. So I'm not surprised with the, I guess, narrative that maybe they explore moving him, because with somebody with that athleticism, I think you got to. That's your due diligence, especially as coaches on the college level.
The way you describe that sounds eerily like our offense. So, yeah, we'll see. It was a great question. I think Chris asked it in the presser, kind of seeing which way Lockett was leaning towards, and Coach actually gave a personal story where it's like you could play either. What would you want to? And didn't even get to finish. And he's like, quarterback. I was like, okay, I love that competitiveness. Love the tape that we saw from him. Dude is definitely, like you said, a competitive athlete who just gets after it, which is even more why I want to see him at safety. But we'll see. I love that we have a great kid out of Pueblo again, just like other kids that we got last year. It's just quarterback's a little bit of a black hole the last couple seasons. So I just want to see him get some playing time, and we'll see where he ends up. But I'll toss it back to Chris.
You just want him at safety because of that jersey you're wearing right now.
I mean, yeah, I'm not going to disclose who it is, but it is a Bears jersey.
But Coach V, one guy I really haven't heard hardly anything about, Brooks Hamlet, the tight end out of Highlands Ranch, listed at 6'6", 215, I think, which is pretty. I'm sure the coaching staff's going to ask him to put on like 30, 40 pounds if he's going to play tight end. But what are you familiar with him? What have you seen out of that guy?
Not as familiar with some of these other guys. I know
Okay.
One of our guys, Gideon, did actually watch Highlands Ranch play Ponderosa. And I mean, Highlands Ranch moved down from 5A to 4A, and they did pretty well in 4A, and they passed the ball a lot. Like, they had less than 10 rushing attempts throughout the season. I mean, they'll have 50 passing attempts, though, pretty commonly. So I know he was in that system. Like I said, not super familiar. I thought he was listed as a long snapper as well, so maybe someone you could bring in there too.
I think now that you mentioned that, I think that's where I saw him originally listed as. So
yeah,
that would make some sense. So I was like, where's this tight end that kind of sprung up out of nowhere?
Right. But I mean, honestly, I know we missed. We have a couple guys who transferred out. I want to say it's Cash Cheeks is the one who left.
Yeah, it went to UTEP, I believe.
which is tough. Yeah, I've loved Cash's game too. You know, him and his brother, they're great players from Colorado Springs, actually. So super familiar with them. So that's a tough loss. But I think bringing in a guy like this, I mean, Cash, he was also a developmental guy too when he came in. Both of them were pretty tall wide receiver, tight end types here. So I think that could be maybe a little bit more of a project, and that could fill in a role here in the next couple of seasons. And I think that's something that, I mean, is a sneaky good signing, I would say as well. You know, I mean, you can't teach 6'6", so there's that as well. So I'm interested in seeing what happens there as well. I know me and the other guys on the podcast, we're talking about him quite a bit here, just kind of trying to see where he fits into this class. But he'll be an interesting guy to see what happens there for sure, though.
Yeah, looking at this class, like really interesting that it's 3A, especially since Coach was trying to beat us off of that path and whatnot. But I love that we got 18 Colorado kids, a few more tacked onto that if you add the transfers and whatnot. Looking through the other classes for CSU and CU, didn't look at Air Force because that's kind of a niche lifestyle choice. But looks like there was one scholarship kid out of all of their classes. Just as a bear, what do you think makes UNC a good place in general and also a good place to compete?
Yeah, I mean, I think from having talked to a lot of players, both on the roster, thinking about committing there. I know when we went there, there there were a lot of high school players that were on their visit over there. So we talked to a lot of players here. And I'm gonna shout out one in Bennett Wilkes. Actually, he actually committed later that day, but you know it was like a noon game or something like that. He came down and found us, and he was like, "Hey, just wanted to thank y'all for everything. Also, I'm committing to Northern Colorado." And what he told me is that he loves how they're going after Colorado guys and they're giving Colorado guys a chance here. And there are people that he knows on the team that he knows are good players. He wants an opportunity to play with them, and that means a lot to him as well. And, you know, Bennett Wilkes, he's another guy who, just talking about him real quick here, he's a great pickup. He does remind me a little bit of Braden Monroe coming out of high school as well. Just somebody who did everything, was like their offense as a wide receiver, which is wild at times. Big special teamer, big offensive player. He averaged, it felt like there were weeks where he would just go off for like 170 yards, 180 yards, 200 yards, 170. So just a high productive guy, big competitor. And I mean, I think he said it best. You know, he likes how they compete here. He trusts what they're building over here, and he likes the opportunities that guys are getting to get out there and compete. I know for everyone in the Colorado high school football community, it meant a lot to see Caden Box, quarterback out of Skyline, just get a start, right? I know he got that start. I mean, it was pretty short lived at the beginning of the season and then at the end as well. But that definitely was something that was like, okay, you know, we see what you're doing over there, coach. And just seeing the other guys starting as well here. But that was definitely something that meant a lot to see a quarterback out of Colorado get his start here. And all the guys we talked to that were visiting that day thought that was super cool. And that was a huge selling point for all of them as well. And so even though they haven't been super successful, right? You're going to have high school kids that are just going to look at it. They're going to be like, I'm going to be the guy who's going to move, who's going to change everything. Right. And that's great confidence to have for sure. Maybe some of them hit reality a little bit sooner than others, but I think sometimes you need blind confidence to change things around. And that's a good thing. And I think all of these guys believe in what they're building over there. And if they didn't, then they would have walked on somewhere else or go JUCO, especially with that new JUCO ruling as well, which is pretty, enticing. It's not just JUCO anymore. And so they had those opportunities. They chose Northern Colorado, and they just look forward to compete and play. And I think that's something that everyone in the Colorado high school football community values a lot.
So, not to kind of spring this on you, but I'm just taking a look back at last year's recruiting class. Um, is there anybody coming into like last year? I know there were a handful of guys you had your eye on, but just like look, Blake Wesleyan got like significant time this year. Blake Palladino, Cam Chapa was obviously a freshman All-American. Lincoln Fa Pooley. So do you do you can kind of comparing? Obviously, it's tough to tell, but how do you think this class stacks up against last year's? Just kind of from some of the things you remember about last year's class.
Yeah, no, for sure. Loved that they all got opportunities once more. Cam Chappa, excited to see him get out there. We were like stoked just to watch him play when we got to go. We know how hard he's worked here. Same with Lincoln and all those other boys as well. I think it stacks up pretty close. I mean, you got a lot of guys who when it comes down to it, it's like, all right, well, who's going to compete harder, right? Who's going to make a bigger impact, stuff like that. I like this class maybe a little bit more here, just from a skill level perspective, having watched UNC and whatnot, and just thinking like, man, we we could use some burners out there, on both sides of the ball. That wouldn't be a bad thing, and I know at the game, I remember thinking, man, if we could get a Marquise Jameson, that'd be great. Watching our defense out there, and at the time, it felt like a pipe dream. But for him to actually be there, that's huge, right? And so, I maybe it's just because I'm leaning a little bit more towards the skill players. Also, Daryl Ishman, who I think is super underrated, I believe moved here. I could just be wrong though, but I think he moved to Colorado as a senior as well. But 6'2", 185, that's another guy to keep an eye on as well. And so I don't know. I think it's pretty close here, but I like my skill players. I think everyone likes skill players, so you can't go wrong with that. So it'll be very interesting just to see what happens, because I mean, some of this is just really hard to predict too. We weren't sure if Cam Chappell was going to start right away. We weren't sure if Lincoln would struggle with the offense or whatnot, which, I mean, I don't know. We are biased, so there's also that as well. But it's just things that comes down to competition in the springtime, in the summer, preseason, all that stuff. And I mean, either way, I think there's going to be a couple guys from this class as well that's going to push some players. And like I said, love Blake Westland and Brady Palladino, or Brady, sorry, that's his brother, Blake Palladino, and glad they were able to get playing time. But those are guys who are competitors, played all over. I think both played quarterback and then played linebacker in college as freshmen. That's insane. But I mean, just going back to my last point, players respect that coach gives these, Colorado guys a chance to compete wherever they could fit in. And it will be interesting to see who could be that guy going into this next year.
Nice. Yeah, I love our class, and Chris and I joke. Chris is from Fowler, and I'm from up north, but we both joke about Pueblo, but we're like, damn, Pueblo, as much as we joke, has actually been one of our turning points recruiting wise and whatnot, especially with some of these young players. Love Lincoln. He's doing a great job for us, filling in and whatnot. And Chappa, he jumped off the charts. We're just crossing our fingers and hoping he doesn't, transfer out. But if he does,
roster.
choose somewhere good at least.
No, I get you. Yeah.
Get your bag while you still can. Any players or any parts of Colorado you feel, you and the guys feel like maybe the Bears are missing out on, or maybe they should look at harder?
Like guys who are unsigned, or
well, just like maybe if there was anybody that like you feel like they missed, or any parts of Colorado you feel like the Bears are missing out on right now.
So here's the thing. I don't think there are any parts of Colorado that they are missing. I mean, maybe you could go out more into the 1A and 2A schools and see what's up there. But I do, just looking at all the offers as well, they offered a lot of players. The sad thing as well, this is the other part of the recruiting pitch, I guess, or what players keep in mind when considering what school to go to. It's hard to be convinced to go to a losing program, and so it felt like, and it sucked, but it felt like this year more than last year, there were players that were like offered by Northern Colorado, and they're like, "Nah, I'll just go D2 and walk on there too and not get paid. I'd rather do that than get paid to go to Northern Colorado," which says a lot. And it is a little bit alarming in some ways here, which makes, all these guys committing and choosing Colorado even like a bigger deal, I would say. But I do think they've done a good job just combing through like Colorado and offering guys here as well. We'll see how it all turns out, I mean, at some point it has to start translating to wins, right? That's not my job to talk about that or be critical of him of that. But that's just what it comes down to, right? And so I feel like he is recruiting well. It just comes down to like, well, maybe you couldn't have gotten I don't know. I don't want to throw him under the bus. I mean, he was committed before, so I'll just say it. Austin Madreski out of Mountain Vista, Highlands Ranch, who's like 6'6", 200, broke every single quarterback record possible, and he chose South Dakota. You know, who we're gonna play next year as
Right.
well. I mean, he's not gonna start because he's a freshman, and I mean they're a great team over there too with a lot of depth. But that's like one guy that came to mind. That I was like, shoot, man, if we offered, I don't know if he would have considered us just because of where we're at and some of the other offers he has. But that's just the reality of it right now, you know. But I do think they're doing their best. I mean, they're on par with a lot of D2s with their commitment to Colorado, which is a good thing, you know. But eventually, you gotta start winning too.
Yeah, and that's the narrative that like we know is out there, but it's helpful to know. And I think Coach brings in his special guest to, come and talk and rah-rah up the team. I think that needs to be one of the rah-rahs is, hey guys, if we start winning, we're gonna get more of your friends, we're gonna get more of your competitors here. But, the guys who went there, who chose UNC, even more power to you. But at the same time, like we understand the guys who kind of like Roger Walters, who he like committed, and then he kind of used that as safety school to bump up to Southern Illinois and whatnot. So we get it. It happens. Once we start winning, hopefully that kind of fades away. But it is what it is. Chris, do you have any more questions for Simon?
Yeah, well, kind of. The Madrewski thing is interesting because one thing like Lamb said is, along with what you've said, it like their main competitors typically CSUP and Mines. Like I wonder if they even, like it with the offers he had, if he even like knew what UNC was with some of the other schools coming his way. But were there, I feel like we've kind of combed through about all the recruits, but was there anybody you or anybody else on the pod wanted to kind of highlight from this year's class that we didn't get around to?
Yeah, no, for sure. And with Austin, he did know about Northern Colorado,
That's fair.
unfortunately. But South Dakota they were recruiting him pretty hard. I felt like from sophomore to senior year, and he committed before his senior year too. So
Okay.
I mean, that's just tough, right? It also helps that they keep winning and going to semis and all that stuff. So
That'll
it
do
is
it.
what it is. I mean, that's just the reality of it. But going back to what you said, anyone that we might have missed here, I do want to mention these two linebackers and the safety here in Landon Sefcovic and Kai Schouts. And Landon, obviously part of Windsor, got to watch him a bit. Played a couple thrilling games this season, but I think that's another guy to keep an eye on here. And then Kai Schouts, and he was actually, I want to say, see, this is where I be forgetting sometimes because we all like evaluate these players, right? And then we average it out. For me, personally, Kai Shelton was the number one linebacker for me in this class. A lot of speed, kind of did everything great in coverage, by the way, and then just brings a lot of speed to stopping the run. Little light at 210, right? I think it's not crazy to see him put on some weight though, and then maybe be competing for a spot. But I really liked Kai Shelton, and I'm not gonna lie, I thought we were gonna lose him to Mines, and that was somebody that I felt like we stole from Mines as well, which is crazy to say about a D2 to D1, right? But I think that's somebody that you look at and you're like, man, he could be a 2 or 3 year starter. I mean, we'll see what happens, right? But he just brings athleticism and just good IQ at the linebacker spot that you're not going to turn down. You're going to want a Kai Shelton out there to put in work. So those are two guys. And then I want to shout out Owen Wind. Excuse me. I know one of I think it's Gideon, either Gideon or Cody said that they really liked Owen Wind. Listed that as a DB, 6'3", 185, played a little bit of safety, also played a corner wide receiver. He could be an interesting guy out of Fort Collins or Fossil Ridge High School up in Fort Collins. And so that's somebody to keep an eye on. Maybe, they stash him for a year or two, let him develop, but he could be a nice contributor to roll out there as well. But yeah, I think that pretty much wraps up. I'm just looking through. Oh, sorry. And then Shane Curry as well. Interesting 6'6" wide receiver from Thomas Jefferson here. That's another guy that Gideon said that he feels like could be a sleeper, but like go and win. Just needs a little bit of development. We'll see where he's at. But I mean, you can't teach height. Also, the blend of athleticism too, that's special. So it'll be really interesting to see how they develop in the next couple of years.
All right, awesome. Well, hey, thank you so much again for hopping on. I know we kind of touched on it at the top, but anything you want to plug? What do you got going on? What should people be looking out for?
Yeah, hey, shout out Playmakers Corner, give us a follow there. We're going to cover high school football again. It'll look a little bit different, maybe a little bit more player centric compared to years past. We'll still do 1A through 5A, but be on the lookout for that. And then I got to plug women's flag football, but the college level, and then girls high school flag football as well. I know some of y'all saw that Super Bowl commercial. Excited to say we had some I should say fans of the podcast on that commercial, 2 or 3 of them, which was really cool to see. Ashley, Vanita, Key, who, Jesus, she's been following us since she was a middle schooler, and now she's a senior on that one as well. So excited to see them get their love, but, it's a growing sport, and we're excited to be able to cover it. But yeah, and appreciate you fellas for having me on the podcast, and I know the rest of the guys appreciate that as well.
Yeah, we appreciate you coming on, Simon, and we're going to have to let Coach Lamb know, check out the Playmakers Corner podcast so he can do his early recruiting, just kind of plug it in while he's in the car, learn about some high school kids.
I'd appreciate it. Our DMs are always open, but I love what he's doing over there. And I mean, hey, just at this point, you know how it is as a Northern Colorado alum. We just want to start winning, like our basketball team. Well, I guess any team, but our basketball team specifically, loving what they're doing over there.
Well, as always, if you like what we're doing, please, please, please like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff for the algorithm. If you don't like what we're doing, Ben's DMs are always open. Feel free to give him a piece of your mind. Have a good one.